So, as many of you may already know, my wife and I are beekeepers. We've had a hive in our back garden since 2015-ish. Here's an older clip of me putting on my bee suit. I forgot to record it this time, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is fairly sting-proof, but they can get through it if they're determined. Thankfully, after a bit of a rough patch over the past year or so, it seems our bees are placid once more, although that's probably a story for another time. But it does mean that I'm hoping to be a bit more hands-on with them this year, and hopefully that'll mean some good beekeeping videos. As always, when I'm in the garden, I have my three helpers, Patsy, Eddie and Taran here. They're Indian runner ducks, and there's a video all about them that I'll link in the usual places. Anyway, like the vast majority of British beekeepers, we use what's known as a national hive, which was standardised back in 1946 with its own British standard. Basically, the point of this at the time was that honey was considered an important resource in post-war Britain, and having everyone using the same bits and pieces made supplying those parts easier as well as processing the honey. There are lots of other designs in use around the world, but the dimensions of the national hive take the British climate and our particular breeds of bees into account. If you've seen hives in hotter countries, they're often much bigger to accommodate the bigger colonies and increased honey production that goes along with those countries' longer flowering seasons. The hive consists of a few parts. There's a roof to keep the elements out, and under that is a crown board, which has these little plastic one-way gates called porter bee escapes, meaning that any bees that end up in the roof can get back down. We don't want them filling that void with wax, and they also allow some airflow through. Then we have what are called the supers. These are shallower boxes full of frames, up to 12 in total, and ours don't have any bees in at the moment because a couple of weeks ago I added a new super immediately on top of the brood box, which is the slightly bigger box where the queen and the nurse bees live and churn out lots of baby bees. But we don't need to bother them for now, so I'll take a look at that in a future video. Anyway, on top of the new super is another crown board with those one-way gates, so over the past few weeks the bees have left this part of the hive and haven't been able to get back in. I noticed some evidence of wax moths on this bottom crown board. These are a natural parasite that live in beehives, and they're not a huge problem, but they do need to be kept in check. We're very organic and hands-off with our bees and don't really have problems with pests, but there are some natural non-chemical ways that we can help them to deal with those, so I'll have to investigate. By the way, the hive is made of cedar, so it doesn't really need any kind of treatment, but we painted ours anyway as the lighter colour helps keep the temperature down in summer, and it also looks a bit nicer in the garden. Well, apart from the spare super that I didn't get around to painting, as I guess I wasn't expecting to ever have all three on at the same time. The bees are building out the new frames really nicely and filling them with honey already, so I'll put the cleaner of the two crown boards and the roof back on and leave them to it. Nice to see that they're lovely and calm today anyway. Well, until I manage to squish one and they all perk up a bit. Sorry! So once the frames are removed from the super boxes, we need to decap them. These pine frames have sheets of what is known as foundation in them, which is made from reclaimed beeswax, and the bees build the cell structure on top of this and fill it either with honey or the queen lays her eggs in there, depending on whereabouts the frames are in the hive. Then they cap it with a special type of wax which is much softer and lighter in colour, which stops the honey absorbing water and spoiling. And while honey does have antibacterial and antifungal properties due to its extremely high sugar content, it is hygroscopic, meaning it will absorb moisture from the air, so it does need to be kept airtight. There are other methods of decapping, but we tend to just slice it all off with a knife. Then we keep the cappings separate after squeezing as much honey as we can out of them, and they can be melted down and made into candles and various other beeswax things. So the frames go into a spinner. This is about the smallest one you can get, but there are bigger industrial electric powered versions. This uses centrifugal force to extract the honey, which then runs down the walls of the spinner and collects in the bottom, so it's best to do this on a hot day like today. I also pour boiling water on the outside to keep everything flowing, and the plastic lid helps keep any moisture out, as well as any hungry insects or indeed vengeful bees trying to reclaim what is ultimately rightfully theirs. Of course, all of this stuff has to be disinfected with boiling water before starting and thoroughly cleaned afterwards, so it's a pretty major operation and also makes a huge sticky mess everywhere, but it's definitely worth it for the honey. Also, modern bee strains are bred to make a lot more honey than they actually need to survive winter, and if it's left in the frames for too long, as we've unfortunately done with some of the frames here, it can set solid, meaning that the bees sadly can't use it anyway. The best thing about using the spinner is that it doesn't damage the wax structure of the frames, so they can be put back into the supers and onto the hive, and the bees will clean them up and refill them, and it's a lot less effort for them than having to build everything up again from scratch. That said, there's a lot of that solid crystallised honey in these which the bees can't use, as well as evidence of wax moth activity in some of the frames. Obviously we're not extracting the honey from those particular ones. It is safe to eat, but the thought of honey with bits of moth in it is pretty icky, so I'll have to replace those with new ones, or at the very least sterilise them and fit them out with some brand new foundation so the bees can build them up again. Once the spinner is full, the honey goes through 2 metal sieves, a coarse one and then a finer one, which just removes any bits of wax or bits of bees or whatever else might be in there. We don't filter or pasteurise our honey beyond this. A lot of big commercial operations do, but it's really not necessary, and the honey has natural enzymes and things in it that can be killed off by too much processing. Oh, and we don't add anything to it either. I believe in this part of the world anything advertised as honey has to be unadulterated, but in some parts of the world it can be bulked up with various other things. Finally, once we have our big bucket of honey, it's all decanted into jars. The smaller jars will be going out to Control Alt Reese patrons. That's my main channel where I talk about old computers and games and stuff, but unfortunately for various legal reasons I can't ship them outside of the UK. But I am hoping to come up with something for my international supporters, maybe some beeswax candles or something similar that I can send internationally. Of course, much like everything else, the jars are sterilised before we start, and thankfully they fit in the dishwasher unlike all the other bits. So that's approximately 5.6 litres or 6.87 kilograms of honey harvested this time. We'll probably take some more later in the year as well, provided they have enough to see them through the winter. Some beekeepers will take it all and then feed their bees on sugar syrup to see them through, but as I said at the beginning of the video, we prefer a more natural approach. So thanks for watching, let me know if you have any questions down in the comments, and I'll hopefully see you again for more beekeeping in a future video.